Lived in Southgate as as a really young kid. I've lived in Norwalk, Linwood, and then that was like really really young. As a kid, I grew up in Riverside, and then in and out of Riverside from here to Glendale, Burbank area, and then when I turned about 17, 18, I moved back to Glendale, like full time. So I was in Glendale, Burbank, and I was in North Hollywood for a while, and now I'm in Pacoima.
Okay. How would you describe those neighborhoods?
Um, they're all very different. South LA it's a much different vibe from Upper LA. Like Southgate area, it's very like it's more the ghetto. It's more hood. The people are a little more. Uh, everybody in the block knows each other. It's a very small community. All those cities like Downey, Norwalk, and going even to the left in like Compton, Inglewood area, Hawthorne, all those neighborhoods are very similar. But like as soon as you start moving up towards like Glendale and Burbank, those are the more like suburban areas. You have a lot of the suburbs and business, like a lot of the popular businesses and malls and plazas and outlets and things like that. So they're just two different worlds. Each neighborhood has its own like, vibe. So
Okay, cool. So growing up, your dad was an artist,
yeah,
and but you didn't live with him.
no. So I grew up with my mom. I grew up with my grandma. I was I would see my dad like every other weekend or as often as I could. I didn't live with my dad up until I was 17, right out of high school. I moved in with him for a few months, and that didn't really work out too well. So I ended up leaving to Vegas on my own. I lived in Vegas for few years actually, and then I came back to LA, and then I've been living on my own, again on my own since then.
Okay, cool. So even though you weren't living with your dad, like, would you say that your dad being an artist influenced you to be an artist, or was that something you picked up on your own?
I would say so. Yeah, he had a his influence was not what people assume it would be. Seeing my dad every other weekend, he never really sat and taught me how to paint or how to draw or anything like that. We talked about art and we went to go look at art. Oftentimes he would take me to an art gallery, a museum, or an art fair, or we'd sometimes go and do a studio visit. So oftentimes it wasn't him really trying to push me to do art or teach me how to do art. It was more him exposing me to art, and that was his main influence. I knew that he was an artist, and I've seen his art, but I never got to watch him work because he liked to work in solitary, like by himself, and he would close the door, and he liked it to be very like quiet and very very solitary, very just isolated from the world. So I never really got to like watch him work, and that I think had I got to watch him work, that would have been a bigger influence. But I seeing his work up close was kind of enough for me. Seeing the finished product was sort of my that's what I sort of like extracted from him, and I could have I felt like I been around him while he was working and didn't necessarily have to watch him. But yeah, we were always going to art galleries and museums and things like that. So that was like the biggest like thing that he did, was just expose me to art, different kinds of art. We'd go to downtown LA, around like the arts district, and like we would see like the graffiti. I grew up around like a bunch of graffiti artists out here in LA, so that was another like aspect of like exposure that I had as a kid. So yeah.
That's dope. At what age did you think like I could do this? Like I can make this what was there a moment or a feeling that you got when you felt like you could actually be an artist?
I had several moments like that. I've been doing art my entire life. Since being a toddler, I've always done art. But there was a moment where I was about 10 and a half, 11, where I entered an art contest that was like a contest that had a bunch of school districts in my city. And I won first place out of a bunch of different school districts. And that was like, it was like, oh damn, like I could actually like pursue this maybe, it was like, that was like my first moment. And then as I got older, I realized that, being an artist isn't as easy as it sounds. And I found myself kind of depressed a lot because I couldn't navigate the art world. I didn't have the help that I wish I had. My dad was he was too focused on building his career still. So I didn't really have that, like that push, in my career. Everything I was doing was by myself. I was learning everything, DIY sort of, and just studying the game and like studying the industry and studying other artists and studying, gallerists and curators and museums and directors and just really trying to understand the whole industry. Like someone who understands like the music industry or the acting industry. But, as I got older, my hunger grew stronger and I became more and more ambitious. Every time I achieved something, I always wanted more. Every time I did art, I wanted to do more. Every time I, did a show, I wanted to do more. So I was always pushing myself. And every time I did something, my ambition grew, like my appetite grew more and more. It grew stronger, it grew bigger. So I think though, the point where, it's really hard because I'm looking back and there was moments where it seemed like I was doing dope stuff with my artwork. And it seemed like I would have been like, oh, I can do this. But last year was really a turning point in my career because it was the first year that allowed me to sustain myself solely on my art. I've been a full-time artist for about a year now. And I've been, supporting myself, supporting, those around me a little bit, helping my family. And it allowed me to buy a house. It's allowed me to make more investments and invest in myself solely off my art. So really last year was that turning point, thinking like, okay, things are changing, like things have really took a leap forward. And I'm not really too sure the reason, but, I think after all the years and momentum that I built up and kind of studying and switching up my style and experimenting with new mediums and new subjects and stuff, it was somewhat of a snowball effect. So I would say last year was really, 2020 was like the year where I realized, okay, I have a really strong chance of making this work legitimately. Whereas like past years, I've done work and I've always sold work, but I've never sold the work that I've been selling as at the rate and at the amount that I've been selling in this last year. So I would say 2020 was the year that made me realize I can actually do this for real. Yeah. I've been waiting for that moment for a long time.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. The pandemic year. Everybody, 2020 was like a real transformative year for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a make or break you year. I think, there was a moment for a month when we went into the pandemic, I didn't even paint. I didn't do nothing. I felt really depressed. I felt, I don't know, held down. I felt like stuck in place. I felt like a sitting duck. And then there was a moment where I, found myself in a like this ball of frustration, and I just unleashed it on painting. And the new work that I created, it got a really great response. So I ran with it. And that's kind of the work that I've been creating now. And, people love it. And I'm glad that people love it because it allows me to experiment with other things. And now I'm not so afraid to step out of my comfort zone and do something that I've never tried before, or pull inspiration from something and then combine it with what I love. My work is very reminiscent of like Renaissance and Baroque work, very classical imagery, religious iconography. I'm not religious, but that imagery was so striking to me as a kid. It has a good story behind it, and I love that. So I like it for the story. I like it for the aesthetic, the look, the sophistication of it, the poeticness of it, and the real aspect of humanity. Like there's a lot of human flesh in classical work, and it's human essence. So that's the kind of work that I like to create. But I also want to combine new styles and new influences to it. You know, the contemporary, modern, and street influence into this old fashioned way of making art.
Like, how old were you when you did your first show?
I was, well, that contest was also an art show. It was about 10 and a half, like 10 or 11, somewhere around there. That was my very first art show. You know, it was amongst a bunch of other works. But I think it's kind of hard because ever since then, I'd always exhibited my work in shows that my dad put together, events that he had. I'd always had artwork in there. Then started going up the ranks and doing shows. Yeah, like Seventh Letter Gallery, Known Gallery. Did, you know, exhibited my work at the Museum of Latin American Art, Trotsky Museum in Mexico. So the years, every year it built up. I don't know if I've done a show thus far that has been sort of the premiere show of my career yet. I haven't had that moment where, okay, this is a huge show at a really big gallery. That moment hasn't really arrived yet. I've shown so many places and I've had more success selling my work in recent days without a gallery than having shown my work in a gallery, you know, and I've been exhibiting my work since I was 10 and I'm going to be 25 very soon. So almost 15 years, you know, of constant showing my work. And there still hasn't been, in my personal opinion, there hasn't been that moment where, wow, this was a big show. You know what I mean? I've had 3 solo shows and they were all really cool. And they're all great and all, but they still, they're not like what I envisioned it to be, you know? But I'd say, yeah, 15 years ago is when I, you know, entered the exhibition world. And then in recent years, it became a little more serious and doing, you know, bigger shows and being part of bigger group shows and museum shows and stuff like that, bigger auctions and stuff. So